Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Pod Strickland. I'm your host, Shwin and this is episode 449. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host Stacy. That is at StacyPatton89 on Twitter /X. Stacy, how are you doing?
Doing pretty well. How about yourself?
I'm doing just fine. Both of us are enjoying our victory Monday, Tuesdays, whatever you want to call them. But we're not here to talk about that. We are here to talk about the Knicks, who also gave us a victory Monday. And we're going to talk about that. But before we get started, I do have to make a few announcements. First being that Strickland has a YouTube channel where you may watch this podcast. If you are and you've not done so already, please hit like, subscribe to the channel, leave us a comment. That'd be a huge help to us. The Strickland also has merchandise, which you can find on our website at www.strick.land. There's a link that'll take you to the merchandise store, and there's all kinds of cool stuff that you can find on there, like t-shirts, sweatshirts, hats, coffee mugs, water bottles, you name it, we've got it. Strickland also has a Patreon, which you can subscribe to. There are a number of different tiers. There's a $6 tier that you get access to Pod Strickland, the podcast that I host over at Prez. You also got access to Takes from Obvious Bozos, a podcast hosted by Andrew Steele, a.k.a. Doug, along with Zach Blatter. And you get access to the Strickland Discord with the conversation never stops. There are further tiers. There's a $9 tier that gets you access to Strickland, our solo pod where I rant and rave about the Knicks even more. You also get access to wonderful premium articles by Matthew Miranda, one of the best in the business. And you get access to Strictly NFL, which, you guessed it, is a podcast about the NFL that is hosted by Constantine Matrikos and Desmond Novak. There are other tiers. There's a $15 tier, $30 tier, $50 tier, and a $100 tier. Let's go with a variety of additional benefits, like listening in on pod recordings, merchandise discounts, and even potentially co-hosting a podcast alongside yours truly one day, whether you choose to subscribe or not. None of this would be possible without you. And none of this would be possible without BetOnline. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting, BetOnline provides you with all the action and the ability to watch the games as they happen. With a large selection of odds on everything from football, NBA, NHL, to entertainment and political props. Head to BetOnline today to get in on the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. BetOnline. The game starts here. The Knicks bounced back after their loss to the Hawks in the Cup. Bounced back with a 100-91 victory over the Orlando Magic. A game that was a slog, if we can call it that. A game where, quite frankly, I thought the Knicks showed a lot of character to win this game. Not because they should have won this game. They're the better team. Orlando obviously out Franz Wagner and Paolo Banchero. But I thought, I know Jamal Mosley was bitching about the discrepancy in free throw shooting after the game. Knicks getting 30 free throw attempts to Orlando's 13. I thought it could have been double that. The physicality Orlando was allowed to play with and get away with was extreme. And I think it took the Knicks probably like a quarter and a half to really kind of adjust to that. They had a lot of turnovers early in this game, but they figured it out. They battled through it, and they were able to come out with victory. And it was a good bounce back for them after kind of the way they lost the Hawks, a game in which, the perception was that they had been beaten down, that they had gotten punked in some ways. But they bounced back. Very importantly, I would say, the Knicks won the rebounding battle. They had 38 defensive rebounds to Orlando's 29. They did a good job on the glass, and I thought they came out with a much deserved victory. I don't know. I guess I'll kind of throw this over to you, Knicks, just to kind of put a bow on it a little bit here. Karl Anthony Towns, 22 points, 22 rebounds, just another monster rebounding performance from Cat. Mikal Bridges, probably his best defensive game of the season in a lot of ways. He had 17 points on 11 shots. And then Jalen Brunson, 31 points on 18 shots, 4 of 8 from 3. I thought all three of those guys were fantastic in this game. OG Anunoby probably kind of flying under the radar a little bit in this game. He only had 7 points and 5 rebounds, but it was a plus 14 in his 37 minutes. But yeah, I thought the Knicks battled in this game, in a game that they had to battle because that was kind of the nature of the game. That was the way the refs were allowing the game to be officiated, and the Knicks persevered through it and got a needed bounce back victory. And it needs to be said, they're now 2-0 against the Magic for the season, which is big considering the Magic are right up with them in that battle for the third seed, at least so far. It doesn't seem like Cleveland or Boston are slowing down anytime soon. So just need to keep. I mean, look, maybe there's a chance they do, but the Knicks are in this competition right now with Orlando for the third seed. And Orlando was 10-0 at home coming into this game. So Knicks dropped them, give them their first home loss. So yeah, I thought this was a really solid win and a win that, it was a good response to a lot of the stuff that a lot of the discourse around the team following their disappointing second half again in the Cup against Atlanta.
Yeah, I mean, the Orlando is shorthanded right now, right? So they're missing obviously Paolo Banchero and now Franz Wagner as well. And this is a team in general that their identity has been around defense, physicality, and the Knicks have now become the team. They used to be the team that was kind of the underdog that had to play that way a little bit, play more physical, muck the game up, get the opponent into a slog. And now they're the team that, because of the offense they run and all the talent they have, the other teams will do that to them. And at the end of the day, Orlando just didn't have the guns to do that all game. I thought Brunson against an elite defender in Jalen Suggs, maybe one of the best point of attack defenders in the NBA, if not the best point attack. I'm struggling to think of too many others that are up there with Suggs. Brunson had an awesome game. There was that one clip where Suggs was basically just dry humping him up the floor, where they finally called a foul. But that's something that Brunson has had. I don't want to say struggle because he's usually persevered, but it is something that has taken a toll on him in the past. It's something that has disrupted the Knicks' offensive sets. I thought they battled well. Cat, everyone was a little sloppy. Atlanta's going to do, or Orlando's going to do that to you. Getting you out of rhythm, and there's some bad turnovers. This is a Knicks team that is not necessarily as much a traditional Tibbs team in that regard. I think they're still probably one of the lowest in the league in turnovers, but they're running a lot more. I don't want to say creative offense, right? But they're doing a lot more stuff, a lot more cutting, and that comes with a cost. I thought, those are the kinds of games I think you want to see the Knicks win more of, because we know that when they're having a good night, when the ball is moving, everything is flowing, they're capable of beating anybody. It's these teams that can lock them up or cause problems that and we've seen it, right? We've seen teams like Cleveland, like Houston, like Atlanta now, right? Give the Knicks problems with length, with physicality. I don't think the Knicks are soft or anything, but it's just when you're built around that kind of offense, those games become tougher to win. That was welcome. We didn't talk about Josh Hart, but in what's becoming kind of a pretty standard performance, 12, 5, and 5, had 4 steals, did have 5 turnovers, contributed to some of those woes. I think you were kind of right on the money last time we talked, mentioning this is a guy that kind of works himself into the game. Maybe that does make him a little bit better as a super sub. But in the second half, he was pretty much lights out, as were most of the Knicks. Closed out a tough game against a pesky team. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's too much more to say about that. I do know that, if they get Orlando in full strength in the playoffs, it would be a 90s type series. And I think, looking ahead, and it's just, I think the Knicks, we'd like to see them probably have more consistent answers against these teams with long athletic wings. Obviously, we know Boston is the top team in the conference, and in the league, and they can throw those at you. But even teams like, Atlanta was a frustrating loss because Atlanta is a 500 team, but they're kind of a bad matchup right now for the Knicks. And that's not to say that doesn't mean the Knicks are failure of team building or something. Every team has some weaknesses, unless you're really Boston at this minute, right? And every team has certain matchups that are going to be more effective against them. Does that mean that the Knicks should still beat Atlanta in a series? Probably. But especially a new team with a little bit of a hybrid construction, not the most reliable bench. These kind of ups and downs are going to happen.
Yeah, no, I think that's pretty much hit the nail on the head there. It's not the Knicks are still they're still finding solutions for stuff. I think they're still working through things as a group in terms of figuring out their identity on a team level, and then on an individual level, there's still work to be done. I mean, it was really good to see Mikal Bridges kind of have the game he did against Orlando. Maybe more defensively than offensively. I've been less concerned about the offense, at least in terms of hitting shots. I think he's been slowly kind of ticking his way up. He's now at 33.9% from three. He's actually shooting 40.5% from the field, 61% on twos. So like
that midi is real. I think we can maybe it ticks down a bit, but he has become like as much as we get a little annoyed when he settles for those, like that mid-range jumper is a real weapon.
Yeah, and I just think that as frustrating as it can be at times, because you're like waiting for that three ball to really kind of rip into consistent form. I mean, it's been fine of late, and I know that it looks ugly when he misses, but it's okay. I mean, it's not like he's shooting awfully from the field or anything. So, I still would expect him to kind of finish the season around maybe like 59, 60 true shooting, maybe even higher. But
he's right at 57 now, right? So
yeah, he's right at 57 basically. So it was good to see. I mean, obviously that he's hitting shots, that he hit shots against Orlando, but I thought more importantly, I thought his defense was really, really encouraging. I thought he played with more physicality than he has in general. He was really, really up on the point of attack. He gave Suggs a really tough time. I know Suggs isn't the most skilled or most, dynamic offensive player, but that
physical,
has not.
And that's something we were wanting to see more of from. They have physical bigs, set hard screens. That's something we wanted to see more from Mikal, which I think he has been better of as of late.
Yeah, and I just think that that hasn't, just because somebody isn't the best offensive player, that hasn't always been a automatic W in terms of Mikal's matchup. So to see him kind of rise to the occasion, and Suggs is, for whatever he's lacks offensively, he is a guy who just keeps kind of like forcing the issue, and he has to right now with Wagner and Paolo out. So kind of keeping him in check and making things tough on him. I mean, Suggs went 4 of 19 from the field in this game, so he definitely had a tough time. To kind of see how Mikal handled that was really impressive, and that's what you need to see more of from him consistently. I actually thought he got a little bit like scapegoated against Atlanta. People are really critical of his defense against Trae Young in the second half. And I mean, look, I'm not going to say he was amazing or perfect or anything, but I think it's really unfair to him to just kind of like put that all on him when I think there was a collective team letdown in terms of some of how they were covering Trae Young on the pick and rolls. And he got hung out to dry a little bit in the aftermath of the game. So to see him bounce back and kind of respond the way he did against Orlando is really, really encouraging. I would still, and I'm probably gonna be my cause de celebra, but like I just really still think the Knicks need to do a better job of incorporating him offensively. I think he needs to get more reps on ball. I do not understand. I don't think there's any reason that he should be at a 19 usage for the entire year, which is 4th on the team. It's right behind OG Anunoby, who's at 19.1. I don't think there's really any reason for his usage to be that low. They need to do a better job of being more purposeful about getting him the ball and having him kind of force the issue, I guess, to some extent, in terms of running sets for him and running design plays for him and putting him in position to create off the bounce. They need to do a better job of that as a collective group, and that probably falls on Tibbs more than anybody. But yesterday, or not yesterday, or yeah, so Sunday was a really good kind of response from him in a lot of ways to that Atlanta game, and honestly across the board. Karl Anthony Towns had fucking 18 defensive rebounds in this game, finished 22 boards. That was huge, and this is a team, Orlando, that is they're a big team, they're a physical team. These are the type of teams that have at times given the Knicks a lot of issues this season. So for the Knicks to respond the way they did, and for individual players to respond the way they did, was really, really encouraging. And yeah, you mentioned, I mean, look, Jalen Suggs, look, I appreciate the intensity he plays with. I'm all for allowing more physicality into the game. The shit he was getting away with in this game, like, he should have fouled out in the first fucking 5 minutes of this game. It was ridiculous. And the play that he fouled out on, that he lost his fucking mind over, was a joke. He fouled Brunson like 5 times on the play, to the point where even like on the MSG broadcast, Pito's like, how is that not a foul? Like when Brunson's bringing the ball at the floor. It was a joke. I'm sorry, it's a joke. Like, and I thought, I mean, the Atlanta game, I'm not going to pretend that the Knicks, they lost the game because of officiating. But that was another game where the officiating, it was a joke. Like, it makes no sense, some of the physicality teams are allowed to get away with regards to Jalen Brunson specifically. And I maybe that game probably isn't the best example of that. But the whistle in general in that game was terrible. I mean, we saw all that stuff in the second half where you got to play where OG Anunoby gets smacked in the face, no call. You got to play where Josh Hart's literally clotheslined at half court, no call. You got a play where Deuce McBride is basically getting fucking like ankle tackled after a defensive rebound, no call. And that stuff is just like, again, all for physicality in the game. You got to call, like, blatant fouls need to be called. And this game against Orlando, I don't give a fuck what Jamal Mosley was saying after the game. That was a joke. I mean, the stuff they were getting, you could have called fucking 6 fouls on every possession with these guys. It was an absolute clown show. And
I mean, it felt. I have a little more sympathy for the refs in that game, just because it's almost like the old Seattle Seahawks, where if there's pass interference on every play, they're not going to call it every play, right? So I have some sympathy for the refs, but I don't know what Mosley was talking about. I mean, you're also the less talented team, right? Like, you should expect you're not going to get the calls. The Knicks are better.
The thing is,
not
they didn't not get calls though. They didn't not get calls though. Is my point. It's like, yeah, you didn't get. I guess you can say you didn't get calls offensively. I mean, I didn't personally feel like there was a huge discrepancy in the whistle. Like, I thought it was basically called about even. And if anything, I thought they got a lot of leeway in this game. They got a lot of leeway in this game to hack and hold and push and shove and do whatever the fuck they wanted. And yeah, I don't really have much sympathy for them coming out with half the free throws that the Knicks did, because that's the way they played. I mean, they were out there just playing fucking like just aggressively pushing, and it was just so overtly physical.
They're like the opposite of a Ryan Day team.
Yes. Well, Ryan Day would definitely let us know how physical they were after the game. But yeah, it was a joke, and I thought, good on the Knicks for responding the way they did.
But yeah, the press conference was insane. I mean, it was worse than even the Nurse stuff last year. There's gamesmanship and stuff, and Mosley with his team shorthanded probably feels he needs to do a little bit more of that. Which, hey, you got to do what you got to do right now. Your number one option is Jalen Suggs. And there's always a random guy who goes off. Yesterday was Tristan Da Silva, who I do like as a player. But I do want to get back to Bridges a little bit. So he's running this year 1.4 possessions per game as a pick and roll ball handler. A respectable 71st percentile, 0.94 points per possession. Last year it was about 4 possessions per game. He was about 45th percentile. Again, it was a tough situation. He was asked to play a role. There's probably a middle ground between there. But the thing that strikes out to me, and what's still, you want to run more sets for him, I get that. There are things under his control. His free throw frequency on those plays is 2.8%. When I type in Bridges into the NBA search, the filter, there are two Bridges that show up. The other one, who I won't do the dignity of saying his full name, 22.6% free throw frequency. Now he's way less efficient, but and 22.6 is really large, right? But compared to Brunson and pick and roll, for example, who is great at drawing fouls, 16% free throw frequency on those pick and rolls. So there are things Bridges can do when he does have the ball that he needs to get to the line more. And I almost wonder, we saw this with Hartenstein, right? Where Hartenstein comes over and at the beginning, he was just asking him to essentially be Mitchell Robinson, right? It wasn't getting to do the fun ball handling stuff at the top of the key or the creation, no jumpers and all that. And Hartenstein struggled. He also the injury, obviously. And when he really showed effectiveness at that stuff, that's when Tibbs let him, freelance a little bit more, run some more DHOs at the top of the key, some of the passing and all of that. And I wonder if that's a little bit what's going on with Bridges. That the guy I don't know how many free throws he has for the season, but it's incredibly low. And that look, he against the Hawks, right? He had 19 points. He was 9 for 17 shooting. That's like a decent shooting night.
He's only taken 23 free throws in the season so far.
23 free throws in 26 games? Not even a free throw per game, right? For his career, he's an 84% free throw shooter. He's never been somebody who lives at the line, but this is kind of extreme. And for a coach who does like to see off of pick and roll, we saw it to the extreme when he started Alfred Payton, right? Over Quickly. I think part of that was even Quickly's more effective stylistically. He's very much about get downhill, get to the rim. And that's just something that Bridges hasn't done here. So I'm happy to see him shooting better. I do like that he's become such a great mid-range option. But I think, Tibbs is probably waiting to see that physicality on both ends. I think we start to see it more on defense of late. That was, more than just, his screen navigation has been better. I do agree with you against Atlanta. I'll have another thought on that in a minute that I'll get to. I think he was unfairly scapegoated. But I think in terms of running more plays for him, that's what my hunch would be with Tibbs, for better or for worse. But we've seen him do that with other guys. You have to try to play it. You got to buy into what he's doing, and then you'll get some more of that leeway. Sometimes it works out. It worked out for Hartenstein. Other guys, Quentin Grimes, it didn't quite go that way, right? So, and getting back to Atlanta, I think, what I was reminded, I thought in the first half, they actually did a really good job on defense. There was, the standard overhelping. Atlanta missed some shots, but especially on Trey, they really forced him into some turnovers, some forced shots that, they cut off his drives. They cut off his reads. I thought Cat played really well in the first half defensively. But I also think when a team like that keeps, it reminded me when a team like that keeps running pick and rolls and just ups that sample, right? They get into the offense quick, run a pick and roll, run a pick and roll, run a pick and roll. Over the course of a game, that really takes a toll on you, right? If you're doing that 2 or 3 times a possession. It really reminded me of a few years ago, Michigan was arguably the best team in the Big Ten. Against everyone but Michigan State. And this was not, this was a Michigan State team that really had Cassius Winston and Xavier Tillman, then not too much else, right? And I remember each game, they beat Michigan 3 times that year. And each game in the beginning, Michigan had, they had a great point of attack defender in Xavier Simpson. They had a good rim protector, a good play drop. And they would do a good job just stopping these pick and rolls. But, Michigan State would push the pace, get into their offense early 3, 4, 5 times. Eventually, it's tough to eventually that pick and roll is going to work. And that's what I saw a lot of in the second half against Atlanta. And that's just tough to defend. And then on top of that, you have kind of the physicality of the wings. So I don't put too much of that on Bridges. I think that's, especially with Trey and, his versatility, it's a tough play to defend. And I thought they did a really good job for half that game. They probably should have been up more. They missed some chances in the first half to really extend that lead, and we saw what happened. But on Bridges, I hear you. I definitely think there's more they can do to incorporate it, but he's got to buy in a little bit more too. And when he does get those opportunities, to be a little bit more physical, you should take that. And I think he will be rewarded with more pick and roll reps if and when that happens.
Yeah, I don't disagree with almost everything you said. I just think that is the dumbest fucking way to go about this. I
It's
think
Tibbs. I get what you're saying, but that's what he's done.
I get what he's done. This team doesn't have time for this bullshit. I'm sorry. Like they need to get Bridges going. They need to make him a priority. You didn't trade. Look, you don't trade what the Knicks traded for him just to be a 3-and-D guy. It's just ridiculous. Like it's fucking asinine. There's no way you're ever going to convince me the front office made this trade with the idea of we just need another OG. Like they have OG. They have a guy that does that at a high level. That's super impactful in that role. They got Bridges because they needed a third guy. They needed a third option. They needed a third option even before they made, obviously when they make the Bridges trade, Randall was still on the team. I think they probably had an idea at that time that they were at least going to try to make a move for Cat. But point being, I think they made that move because they're like, we need another guy who can create a little bit, who can be a third option. And Bridges obviously overburdened as a number one. But that's a guy that you're like, okay, well, as a one, obviously real limitations, but that experience, now we slot him down as a third option. He's probably valuable there. He probably gives us a little juice there, and you're not getting any of that because you're not leaning into it. And I can sit here and say, well, Brunson needs to get him more involved, or they need to look for him more on the floor. But ultimately, that comes from the coach. I think that's you're at a point. You're 26 games in. We've seen them all play a shit ton of minutes together. Like we kind of understand how the pecking order works and how players are being used. That's obviously about kind of the roles being set by Tibbs. And while I can understand it, I disagree with it. And I think it's ridiculous in a lot of ways. Like I think you need not just because you're not leaning, you're not kind of giving this player you acquired at a premium cost an opportunity to show what he can do offensively. But I think there's a value to getting Brunson off the ball a little bit, having another guy who can attack defenses and run pick and rolls and ease that burden a bit on Brunson. Like, I think that there's a real value to that. And we're not.
And also with the bench, right?
And with
you can probably decrease campaign and Deuce's usage a little bit on ball. That'll help those guys.
And I think that's like a main thing, a big thing that they have not leaned into or kind of gone towards enough this season. So hopefully that ticks up as we move forward. But we'll have to see what the case is, honestly. Okay, so wanted to bring this up. You posted this in our Discord yesterday, and I think this was pretty interesting. I don't even know what prompted this, to be honest. But you kind of, this is the message you put in was, how many contending teams in recent memory have had a wing/guard who isn't a pull-up threat, isn't an above-average shooter, isn't a good defender? Memphis is the only one I can think of. I think this was about, we were talking about Russ last night, right? Talking about Russ.
Russ was on Discord. I was in a long discussion with someone about whether OG Anunoby is better than RJ. But I was discussing like RJ, can he fit on a winning team? And this is where I came to. So sorry, RJ fans. That's what prompted it from my end.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know. And I think this was interesting, not because, there's not that many examples, but he kind of should inform team building in a lot of ways. Like, what are the type of profile of players that make sense to build around, that you should target? And RJ, like, he's made strides in Toronto. He's playing better. He had a solid game yesterday against the Bulls in a loss. But like, I mean, the idea that he's more valuable than OG is pretty much all predicated on his value with the ball in his hands. But if he's not good enough in that capacity to be a contender, like, that's just reality. He's not good enough. He doesn't have complementary off-ball skills. Like, he's not a particularly good shooter. We know that, obviously, from his time in New York. And he's not a good defender, which is like a pretty big piece of this. Is kind of why I think the Mikal discourse has been so interesting, or not interesting, but it's been hard because you could probably live with the offensive kind of ups and downs if you were getting the defensive output that you anticipated from him. But so far we haven't, and not consistently, not consistently. I think it's gotten better as the season has gone on. I think there have been signs recently that he's getting close to like what you expect on that end. But that when you're a third option, fourth option, you need to be a plus defender, and RJ's never been that. He was that, I would say, his second year in the league. He was really good defensively that year for me. But since then, it's just been not good. It's not been good. And, if you're kind of like thinking about the profile of players you build around, like, yeah, of course you need shot creation. You need somebody who can, be your offensive fulcrum. But then you have to judge like the value of those players. And, it's kind of like an example of a player who I think is better than the nerds and people like myself would accept historically in his career is probably DeMar DeRozan. But like, I also think the reason I don't value him that much is because I'm like, you're really good offensively, but you're not so good offensively that, if you're on my team, I kind of have to build my offensive system around you to some extent. I have to dedicate like, top 1 or 2 usage to you. And you're just not good enough for that. Like, you're just not. And that's not really like, that doesn't mean he's a bad player, but that's kind of like, it tells you what the threshold is to be one of these offensive centerpieces in the NBA, right? Like, DeMar DeRozan's a really good player, but he's not good enough for that. He's not good enough for that if you're trying to be a contender.
Yeah, I mean, and to be clear, I mean, especially late career of DeRozan, and he's become really fantastic passer, become a really efficient player. That would be, a leap. It's I don't even think RJ is quite at that point yet. But I think it's not, and I don't want to turn this into a bash RJ thing, but I think to your point, like, it's fine. Like, I'm happy that he's improving, and he is improving, and I think there's a lot of reason for optimism for his career. The passing was something we really wanted to see in New York. It's come alive in Toronto. He's making a lot of good reads. He's finishing at a better rate than he ever did. It's not like Toronto has great spacing. So I get all of that, right? But it's not just him. It's, you look at a guy like Scoot Henderson, right? Really struggling right now. It's, I think why is, let's, if you don't have a pull-up game, right? Or it's really tough to be that lead ball handler unless you have really good spacing around you, right? So to create that spacing, right, especially if you're a wing or even if you're a guard, right? If you're a guard that relies on really good athleticism, you need that spacing to be able to really be effective. But now that you're surrounding them with spacers, with other, with really good shooters, you now also, those shooters typically, and this isn't that shooters are necessarily worse defenders, but it's kind of stats, right? If a guy is a really good shooter, it's less likely just that he's also a really good, just this is simple probability theory. It's less likely that he's also a great defender, right? Not that there's any causality, but it's just those are two rare things when you're talking about high level, right? To get both of them is more rare. And you have to pay up for that, right? So it really helps in that case, right, where you don't need everyone else to be both a great shooter and a great defender. So if a guy has a pull-up game like Brunson, you can surround him with guys that maybe aren't insanely good spacers because he gives you a lot of that, right? Because even without great spacing, he can create from the perimeter. If you don't have that, you need to add value on defense because you're going to surround this guy with not great shooters or with not great defenders, right? Because you're trying to, look at a guy like Giannis, right? You're surrounding him with a lot of guys who can space the floor. It can compromise the defense a little bit, right? You look at it, so he has to play that role. And we've seen it with Milwaukee. I think you brought it up, right? He's really stepped up his defense of late, and that is correlated with Milwaukee improving. They're right, I think only a game and a half or 2 games behind the Knicks now. You look at a guy like Amen Thompson, there's more optimism there. The guy can't shoot a lick. RJ is a better shooter. But he adds so much value on defense. You now have some more flexibility around him, right? To create around him. And if you're going to say, all right, well, if you're not an on-ball guy, it's to be a winning player, you either need to be a great shooter. And by the way, right, even these great shooters, these specialists, if you can get played off the floor, they don't play heavy minutes in the playoffs. Even if you're a great off-ball offensive player, which is fine, but that's something to be included. To get to be that guy, right, without without defense, it's tough on these winning. You just see very few players like that. The only guys I think who play heavy minutes in the playoffs that aren't really good defenders are these guys who are great pull-up shooters, and number one options as a result of that. And I think Ja is the main exception because they've done a good job. They drafted young. They got guys who could both space and defend. And Ja is a really unique talent. But and I'll even say his defense has been better this year. But you don't have to hang your hat on that. It's from a team construction perspective, though. Like, this is a tough time for lead ball handlers who don't have a pull-up shot. You have to add a lot of value on defense at that point, or you have to be able to function off ball. But and to RJ's credit, I think he's improved as a catch and shoot guy. I think there is defensive potential. The guy I've mentioned quite a bit of late that I can see more and more is potentially a guy like Andrew Wiggins, right? He was bigger than RJ, more athletic, but RJ's finishing and has really come up to that level where you're like, all right, maybe he's not a freak athlete, but you're seeing it more and more. He's really strong. And if he's good enough as a catch and shoot guy, the only thing really missing at that point is defense. And I think he can be a good player on a winning team at that point. Because he fits in a little bit better but if you're looking at should the Knicks have tailored their entire team building strategy around that? No. And then more generally, it's tough. Scoot Henderson is a tremendous talent, right? But without adding value on defense or that pull-up shooting, it's a very narrow pathway that really only Ja has made work. Like the other guys in that mold, Fox developed the ability to shoot. John Wall, I think, would have to adapt more even, but he did develop a good mid-range pull-up game. And, at his peak, he actually had a season or two where he's playing really good defense too. But it's tougher for those guys, as the game continues to evolve.
Yeah. I think you kind of see the premium that teams, like every team now, places on guys that can shoot the ball. At every position almost, right? I mean, even with the Knicks, like it's actually pretty interesting to watch the Knicks when Cat is off the floor, because they don't have another center who's even remotely similar to Cat or can kind of like be a facsimile of Cat, right? Like Naz Reid isn't as good as Cat, but he has a similar skill set, right? Like, so you can kind of effectively play the same way when, for Minnesota last year, they could play the same way when Cat was out and Nas was in instead. With the Knicks, like
Denver's backup?
It is DeAndre Jordan right now.
Yeah, so I guess they go to the same thing. Sorry.
Yeah, it's basically the same thing. Jokic.
No, I think the closest fact, Cat is the closest thing to Jokic on offense, right? I would say at the center position.
Yeah, or Porzingis, but Porzingis is different. He's just really different to me. But like, yeah, like the Knicks don't have anything close to that, so it's kind of interesting watching them play. When like Precious is in for him, or when Sims was in for him, and obviously Sims isn't. He did his best, but we know what Sims is and isn't, and it's pretty funny that Precious got healthy and Sims was immediately like, "All right, thanks, man. You can go sit on the bench."
Thank you for your service.
Yeah, thanks. But it's kind of interesting to watch that because it's a very different dynamic, and that's something that I wonder, like, how much they consider. And to credit, I mean, not even necessarily credit Tibbs, but something interesting I've been interested in is kind of like how he's starting to use Precious, not just obviously to back up Cat, but also alongside Cat. I think that's valuable, and I think they need that look. But kind of how they balance all these things, right? Because when Cat's on the floor at the 5, you're really playing 5 out. Obviously, the floor is more spread. But there are also times where maybe you want more size on the floor with Cat. But like when he's on the floor with Precious, obviously you don't play 5 out, right? Precious is not a spacer. He's not a good shooter. So how you run your offense has to vary in those looks, and how kind of like each player's role is defined is different. And obviously then you also get the Precious at the 5 looks too, which are different in their own way, and how you want to match up defensively and all those things. But it's a pretty interesting dynamic, and it's one the Knicks haven't had to deal with previously because, obviously Hartenstein was a much superior offensive player to Mitchell Robinson, but I think it's fair to say that while there was value to what he could provide in terms of his screening, his ability to run dribble handoffs and be an effective kind of like decision maker with the ball, in this and the spacing that it did afford, or at least created, it was still stylistically a lot of like, pick and roll. He's going to roll to the rim, and the spacing element was consistent in that sense, right? It was you always knew that it wasn't really 5 out. You were really never getting a 5 out look. Whereas now, I think you're having to toggle between like, okay, when Cat's at the 5, we have all this space, and then when he's not at the 5, now we have to adjust back to like the normal NBA spacing for the vast majority of teams. And that's an interesting dynamic that I think they're still kind of balancing and working their way through. And I think Brunson especially has probably the most responsibility in that sense of kind of figuring out how teams are covering him and how teams are covering the Knicks in general, and then how to kind of play off of that and run the offense.
Yeah, I mean, I think Cat is kind of 101. There's very few players that give you all that, and he can score at really all three levels. Isn't a super mid range heavy guy, but we know he can take those. There's going to be a lot of adjustment. I think I've talked about this, right? But it's taken 26 games or so, or 25 games to really see I don't want to call it the Brooklyn stink, but let's just call it spade a spade. Bridges was on a different type of team last year. And he's had to adapt to not being a number one option to a team that's every possession matters on defense. And not to say that Brooklyn wasn't feisty at times or whatever, but you're just playing for different stakes. There's going to be lots of adjustments. I think they've done really well. They are third in offensive rating, but they've been basically 0.2 behind Cleveland and like less than a point behind. I think it's like half a point behind Boston. Mm-hmm. So they've now crept up to 16th in defensive rating, which I think you've kind of mentioned is probably that's kind of the bellwether. And that's, can they be a middling defensive team?
They're 15th in defensive rating on Basketball Reference.
I saw 16th on NBA.com, but yeah, Basketball Reference may have updated. So it's getting there. It's coming. But I was also thinking about this, right? This is to get to this level, you have to make hard choices, right? I think the Knicks for a few years were being very measured and calculated, and the feel. I don't think there's anyone that just linearly, organically, without making a big move, unless you tank for millionaires like Sam Presti, right? Doesn't, and he had the leeway to do that, right? Hinkie ended up not getting that leeway, and things changed. At some point, you have to make a big move. This is what Knicks fans have been saying: pick a direction, pick direction. If you're going to develop the kids, then build around that. If you're going to make a big move, then get the value for them. And this is what they've ended up with, right? They're making a bet on two offensive stars who are subpar defenders and surrounding them with a lot of role players. A heavy starting, top heavy a little bit starting lineup. And Austin Rivers had some comments on that I'd like to discuss afterwards. But I wanted to ask this just because I think, kind of there's been a lot more angst. I felt a lot more angst kind of analyzing these games, and how they're looking, because Bridges was the big move. Cat was a big move. There isn't a whole lot. There aren't major moves probably coming, right? They can get better on the margins. They'll find ways to do that. But like on the Leon Rose era, and I know this is probably not a discussion that we need to have yet, but I have been thinking, the NBA history is littered with really good teams that just never got over the hump. Most recently, you can think of Dame's Portland teams, but even the '90s, I love those Supersonics teams. I love the Orlando Magic with Penny and Shaq.
You could talk about the Durant, Durant,
Durant
Westbrook.
OKC, the 7 seconds or less team, right, which in many ways changed basketball, didn't quite get over the hump. Ultimately, D'Antoni was fired, or he was fired in Phoenix, right?
He was fired. Yes.
Yeah. So I guess if that is what ends up happening, right? They have that level. They go to the conference finals a few times. They don't win the championship, though. How would you view the Leon Rose era at that point?
Well, I mean, I guess. Look, you don't. The Knicks have made these moves to be a competitor, and obviously, when you view yourself in that light, success is based on winning championships. And if they don't win, um, if you don't win, then you failed ultimately. By the way, just to clean up factually, D'Antoni was actually allowed to leave. He was allowed to talk to other teams about coaching opportunities, and then the Knicks obviously made their offer, and he took it. Yeah, I mean, I would say that that it is a failure ultimately. I mean, if you want to talk about teams that were really good but never got over the hump, you don't need to look further than our very own Knicks in the '90s, right? They made 2 finals. They lost in 7 games to Houston in '94. They lost in 5 games to the Spurs in '99. Those are teams that ultimately were failures in the sense of, if you're a contender and you don't win, you failed. But I've thought about this a lot, where it's like, well, how would I feel if the Knicks don't ultimately ever get over the hump in terms of, winning the conference, winning a championship, whatever. I just think it depends. Like I could say that they failed, but I could still feel like, if they're making Eastern Conference Finals and they make a finals run 1 or 2 times, and they ultimately come up short, as far as winning a championship, would I consider that a failure over, like, let's say, like the Bridges trade, they traded out their picks until 2031. So if you want to kind of give it that timeline of like over the next 5, 6, 7 years, if that's ultimately the ceiling of like, yeah, they made a finals, but they couldn't, ultimately win that championship, how would I feel about that? I think I would probably, in the moment, I would be very frustrating, I'm sure, and it can feel like, that you failed. This is how I feel, like, kind of about the Bills, where I'm like, team's been really fucking good for a lot of years now, but ultimately you haven't made a Super Bowl, haven't won a Super Bowl. That's really frustrating, and it can be. It's not even. It's normal to kind of get frustrated and view it all as a failure in the moment. But I think, think about how you felt. How did you feel about the '90s Knicks after the fact, right? Like after that team ages out, and then the Knicks go into this decade of, not even more than a decade, like 15, 16, 17 years of just being a bad basketball team. You look back on that and you're like, look, if you want to call that a failure, is a failure, but I'll take that failure over a lot of the basketball I have watched over the course of my Knicks fandom. And, I think they still have a lot of things to work out with the cup, but I think one thing that is good about the cup is it's like, okay, well, it gives you another kind of competition to chase, right? Not just the NBA championship, but okay, the NBA Cup is its own separate trophy. We're gonna get the finals of that today with OKC and Milwaukee. And I think that there's a value to that, and it's good, but it's the danger of, like, not the danger, but the reality of American sports in a lot of ways is each league is played for the singular championship that's awarded at the end of the season. And the majority of teams, you got to remember, like the vast majority of teams that are contenders don't win championships. Just how it works. Like that's the nature of the business, right? I mean, look at the Suns. The Suns went to the NBA Finals in 2021, and since then they haven't even come close. They were up 2-0 in the NBA Finals in 2021, and since then they have lost in the second round. lost in the first round, and like blew up their team, right? And I mean, yeah, blew up their team in a lot of ways in terms of they made a similar all-in trade. Funny enough, Mikal Bridges was involved in that as well, to go get Kevin Durant. And for right now, anyway, that you can't call that a success. And the history of the NBA is littered with these teams like the Rockets, right? 2017 and 2018, they're right there. They're pushing Golden State, but they don't get over the hump. Philly, right? I mean, how many years have we talked about, oh, Philly's a contender, but they haven't made it back past the second round ever. And, is that a failure? Yeah, it's a failure. But I would venture to guess, if you ask Philly fans, like, would you take this over, like, I don't know, the bottom of the process years where you're just ass and you're chasing talent and you're trying to cobble together pieces and figure out what you're trying to do as a team? Like, no, yeah, of course I think they would take it over that. I mean, we'll see what the Magic do. The Magic are obviously young and they have a lot of talent, but like, there's no guarantee they become a contender. There's no guarantee that Cleveland went all in. I think if you ask their fan base, they'd probably be like, yeah, look, like maybe this hasn't worked, maybe this won't work, but I'll take this over the general kind of like fate of their franchise when LeBron hasn't been on it of just being a bad team. I'm sure they would take this level of competitiveness and on-court success over that. And, we'll see what happens with the Leon Rose era Knicks. And, you said that they're probably out of big time moves. I mean, look, we thought that after the Bridges trade, and then they pulled a cat out of the hat. But they, like maybe they do have another big move up their sleeve, right? Like who knows what can happen in the NBA? Like we'll see what happens with the Lakers. It's possible that LeBron James or even Anthony Davis get traded at some point. Do the Knicks? Would the Knicks have any ability to acquire either of those players? On the surface, you'd say no, but then you have to think about like, well, what if you start putting players on the table, right? Like and that's why I don't know that big moves are always off the board for them, because they have good players now. They have good players that you can trade, and that they have standalone value as good players. Like their value is who they are. Whereas I think when you're trying to level up on talent, your best kind of avenue to do that, because you don't want to lose talent either, right? You want to kind of stack talent. So your best avenue to do that is kind of using your draft capital, which the Knicks, look, they've done that now, right? They used a protected first round pick to get Josh Hart. They used 4 first round picks and a protected Milwaukee pick to go get Mikal Bridges. They used a protected Detroit pick as part of the package to get Cat. Like they've used their picks now to stack talent, and we'll ultimately see where it lands. But yeah, I mean, to answer your question, I guess like, yeah, sure, it would be a failure if they don't win a championship, but it's all kind of like degrees of what constitutes. I mean, would you say like the grit and grind Grizzlies were a failure, right? I mean, I think Grizzlies fans still fondly look back at that team in that era, even though they came up short ultimately. But like, you can't. There is a value to trying, like to actually try and compete, and the risk is you come up short, but you got to play your hand. You got to actually like put your chips on the table and take the shot. So, look, like you meant, like for the longest time, the criticism of the Leon Rose era, not for me, because I kind of understood why you got to be judicious about who you push your chips in for. And we'll see like what the ultimate outcome is with Mikal Bridges. Right now, I think it's fair to say that it's been underwhelming, but the book isn't closed on him or the Knicks or this Knicks team. I think there's still plenty of stuff that they need to work out, and for him personally and for the team collectively. And we'll see where they are at the end of the season. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, if they come short, it's a failure. But I don't think that there's degrees of failure, and it's important to not lose sight of that. Like, it can be disappointing, but you can also, if you come out, if we're sitting here in 2031, and the world still exists, and the Knicks haven't won a championship, but they've had playoff runs, they made a conference finals, maybe they've made an NBA finals. I don't know if you would look at that and be like unmitigated disaster, regretful of like all the decisions they made versus being like, man, it would have been nice to get over the top there, but I appreciate what this franchise has done, right? Like I look back at this and think, wow, what a great era. I mean, like you mentioned Suns, right? Do you think Suns fans look back at that 7 seconds or less era and are disappointed? I mean, sure, there's probably a level of disappointment, but I don't think they look back at it and are like, fuck, that sucked. I think they look back and they're like, sucks they didn't get over the top, but that was fun. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, and I think and it is an enjoyable team to watch, right? I mean, the team has a great identity. They're one of the best, I mean, maybe the best Knicks offense of my lifetime. So they have some really entertaining players. And yeah, I mean, I think it's hard. It's without it, especially when you don't have a generational player, right? I mean, we've seen teams with generational players fail, right? The Magic failed with Shaq, or by this definition, right? Um, maybe you don't, obviously you have the Thunder. Depending on what you think of Durant, I would call him still generational talent, and they had two other guys who won MVP awards, and a DPOY. So it's. I think you have to keep that measured, but it does. I think that just puts more pressure on the season, right? Because it is no longer building towards something, and I think that's why the Bridges trade is so scrutinized, right? Because Cat is, being Cat, it does, that trade reduces their financial flexibility. I don't pretend to be Jeremy Cohen or a cap expert. I would imagine part of what made Bridges more attractive, maybe than other guys who they could have gotten for that cost, would be his salary. Um, and But I think that that is why the move is so scrutinized, because now it's we're in the end game now, so to speak, right? And there's a lot more pressure on every game. And I think but we need to kind of keep that in mind that these are problems we would have loved to have when we were watching Lance. I don't want to. I don't want to shit on any old Knicks, but the 2010s were rough. The 2000s were rough. A brief glimmer of hope with the mellow teams, but even then, like this team gives you, I think, a lot more hope than any of those teams did. The only really fun team in that mellow era was that 2012, 2013 team, and that didn't feel sustainable in the same way. And they're fun guys to root for. It seems like I think you've made this point, every game ends up being a referendum on the future of this team, which isn't exactly fair or rational way to live. But it's only more fun when every game matters this way. Um, and the highs have been pretty great. The lows have not been that great. And look, they're 16-10. You could talk about the schedule all you want. They've faced some teams that have not had injuries, but they've been a second half team under Tibbs. They're pretty decent first half right now, right? We'll see what happens to the injuries and stuff, but and the depth. But all things considered, I think if you told us before the season they'd be 16-10, one of the top offensive teams, fifth in net rating. I think James mentioned this on this Discord. The Knicks have actually underperformed their net rating by 2 or 3 wins. So not not to say that they should the wins and losses are account. The Knicks were a playoff team in 2021 and 22 by net rating, right? But that's why you play the actual games and play the fourth quarters. So a lot of work to be done there. But I think it's trying to keep that perspective that the vast majority of teams do fail. And when you don't have a generational player, which I love Cat and Brunson, I don't think either of those guys are. That's we'll see what happens with Pacome Dadier. But yeah, and kind of on that note, we've talked a lot, I think, ad nauseum about this depth issue and the wing issue. One, does the depth concern you? And two, is that wing, what are like, how much do those things concern you, right? The fact that the stars are playing 40 minutes a lot, besides Deuce. I mean, I'll talk about this. Austin Rivers was on a pod yesterday, and he kind of went pretty hard on the Knicks bench. I think he overplayed his hand because he said they don't have one guy who's a good player, which I think Deuce would start in a lot of teams. I think he's a better player than Austin Rivers ever was by far. But I think it was fair for him. Outside of that, it was not unfair to say, they have solid players, but these are mostly specialist types. We'll see. I think Precious has a higher ceiling than that, but Sims is really just a rim protector and a rebounder, and he's undersized, and you can't really play him heavy minutes at center. You have Precious who's still working himself back into shape, but obviously takes some stuff off the table on offense. And then Payne, who's rough on defense, and Deuce, and that's really it. And so you have three guys with some glaring limitations, and then you have Deuce, who is a really good player. Um, how much does the depth concern you, and how much do you think this like athletic wing thing is a thing, and is the solution to that for the Knicks on the roster? Yeah, just kind of your eval of that whole situation.
Look, I think the Knicks' depth is obviously an issue. Their bench is not great. They have functionally 8 NBA players as it stands right now. We'll see if Pacome or Kolek or
Shamet's coming back too, right?
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see if either of the 3 rookies can at some point contribute consistently this season. I don't anticipate that being a thing that Tibbs looks into. I think they're more long-term plays. Whatever. Yeah. Good news for the Knicks. Shamet he played last night in the G League, so he's on the mend and getting himself back into shape. So they'll get him back at some point. That'll give them a 9th NBA player. As far as the athletic wing thing, and yeah, I mean, I think that's a problem. I think it's been a problem all season. I thought it was a problem coming into the season, and some of that is because you're starting your 3 wings, right? So you just don't have the depth at that position. Whereas you look at a team like Houston, right? And it's like, okay, well, we start Dylan Brooks and Jalen Green, who probably shouldn't start, by the way. It's not good. But then, we have Amen Thompson. We have, Tari Eason. We have Cam Whitmore, who hasn't even been healthy until recently again. We have him, right? Like, we have all of these different options. We have Jabari Smith Jr., who is effectively a gigantic wing. Like, they have 5, they go 5 deep really at that wing position. New York doesn't have that. And I think there's something to that. I think you want more wings. You would like to have more wings. I also think you just need your starting wings to play better. I mean, look at Boston. Boston doesn't have some tremendous amount of depth. They have Jason Tatum, they have Jaylen Brown, and then their other wings are who? Sam Hauser.
White plays bigger, but
White plays bigger, but it's like, I guess Drew Holiday plays bigger. But if you're talking about wings, and look, as good as White and Drew Holiday are, I don't think I would describe either of them as like uber athletic or something. Like, they're not standout athletes on the wing or anything of that nature. Sam Hauser is no great, fantastic athlete. He's a good player, but he's not a fantastic athlete. And other than that, it's like Pritchard, right? And various different guys that chip in. But like, I don't think it's about how you can fight that athleticism. And part of that is physicality, which I think is, I think that's where it's been frustrating is if you're not going to be the most athletic team, the most high flying team, then a way to get around that is being a more physical team, of being a tougher team, I guess. And the Knicks haven't necessarily proven their chops in that capacity yet this season. So do they need to make, is there a way for them to get a better bench piece, depth piece? Possibly. It's definitely possible. I think that it's more likely that improving the depth is more of something that gets done in the off season versus in season. I don't know that we already know that. We just talked about it here. The Knicks have kind of played their big hands, so they don't have a lot of additional assets to put on the table to address that. Mitch Robinson being out and not having played yet this season is also an issue, because if you were looking at your roster, he would probably be the player that you view as expendable in the event that you can upgrade your wing depth or maybe get another ball handler, something along those lines. He'd be expendable in that scenario, but he hasn't played yet, so he doesn't have value. And, is he going to be back in time to the point that not only can he get on the floor, but can he get on the floor and play well enough that now teams are interested in him prior to the trade deadline passing? I don't know. I don't think so. And so for that reason, I kind of expect this to be the Knicks roster more or less through the end of the season. And the depth is what the depth is, but I've talked about this previously. The Knicks didn't make their moves to contend this year or nothing. Like, yeah, they might not contend this year, and that will suck, and that'll be frustrating, and they will get hammered for that by fans, by media, whomever. But the Knicks made these moves to put together a team that they could build around, a core of players they can build around for the next 3, 4, 5 years. And part of the value of having that core in place is now you can worry about working around the margins. If you want an example of a team that, maybe it took them a little longer than they would have hoped, but now things are looking a lot better, is Cleveland, right? Cleveland made their big move for Donovan Mitchell, and in their first year together, we smacked them around in the first round, right? We beat them in a 5-game opening round series, which really wasn't that competitive in the final 3 games. And part of the reason that they sucked, or that we kind of exposed them, was their depth was poor. And at that time, it was like, well, they're screwed. I don't know how are they going to address these depth pieces? And to get the depth, maybe they need to start trading out one of their core 4 players, right? In terms of Mitchell or Garland or Mobley or Allen. And, it's taken a couple of years, but, last year, right, they go out and they get Strus. And this year they've added, Ty Jerome. And, they found a guy like Sam Merrill off the scrap heap, right? They found these depth pieces that have now given them a boost. And then on top of that, they made a coaching change. I don't anticipate the Knicks making a coaching change after the season. Maybe that'll change depending on how the season plays out. I would be skeptical of it, given we've seen Leon Rose show a lot of faith in Tom Thibodeau, even at times where I think myself included and many others were clamoring for a change to be made. I don't anticipate a change being made there. But like, the point is, it might not happen this year. You might not get the depth. You might not get the depth that you need for this to truly be a contender this year. That's kind of my expectation, to be honest. But I think in the offseason, you have more opportunities to make moves. You'll have more flexibility in the trade market with roster spots and all that type of stuff. The cap will jump, so you'll have more room under the second apron. The Brunson extension is a boon for the Knicks in that sense. And other than that, their kind of cap situation is pretty solid because there's 6 guys, in terms of Brunson, Cat, OG, Hart, Bridges, and Deuce. Those guys are locked in on their contracts. So you don't really, exactly what they are. It's about finding those extra 2 or 3 pieces. Is Precious a guy that is part of that moving forward? Maybe. Is Cam Payne somebody that you're like, hey, this is a guy we'd like to bring back. He's a solid bench guard, potentially. Is Shamet a player of that caliber? I don't know. Maybe. And if not, now you have opportunities to, now Mitch is an expiring contract in the offseason. Maybe there's something that can be done there. So, yeah, I mean, I guess to answer your question, yeah, I do think the depth is an issue. And I do think some of it is about, needing another wing and generally needing to get more athletic. Like you go and watch that Houston OKC game that they played on Saturday night in the Cup, and you could kind of feel the athleticism on both ends of the floor, right? You see kind of like Houston is playing small and OKC matches them and all these type of things, and you can kind of feel that how it was a physical game, but it was physical while these guys are kind of flying around the floor. I don't know that the Knicks have that ability right now. And to some degree, they're always going to be working with limitations because Brunson is not ever going to be some supreme athlete. And Cat is, to some degree, a defensive liability. So they're always going to be working a little bit at a deficit in those areas. But I think that you kind of take that and, the main key to me is I think the Knicks probably view their core of 6 players well. You just need to figure out those extra 2 or 3 pieces. I mean, even Boston, right? How they kind of made their big moves for Porzingis and Drew Holiday. But I mean, one of the big reasons they were able to contend last year and obviously win the championship, and they look like they're going to be in the mix again, obviously this season, is Pritchard takes a leap, right? Sam Hauser is good, and Al Horford staves off time again and continues to be good. Like those three players are really, really critical to their success. Um, and the Knicks don't necessarily have three players outside of the starting lineup that you would feel as good about as Boston does. Those guys, even like you want to include Deuce, so Deuce can be one, but then you still need to find those other two guys. And did Austin Rivers go off the deep end a little bit? Yeah, I mean he's given out a hot take to some extent, but I don't think he's necessarily wrong in saying that the Knicks' depth is an issue and that they don't have a great bench. We know that. We knew that coming into the season that depth was going to be an issue, right? This was like the biggest kind of change in the Knicks over the last year compared to where they were prior to making all these big moves is the depth has taken a hit. I mean, the depth took a hit when they made the OG trade. We talked about it at the time. And we felt it at the time. We're like, man, every time Brunson sits, the offense kind of stalls out. Your depth took a bigger hit because you go get Mikal. You didn't have to give up a core player in that trade, so that was good. But then you have to give up Randall and you give up Dante DiVincenzo to go get Cat. So it's like a 2-for-1 trade. I think the Knicks, at least their return right now looks fantastic. Cat's been great, but it still hurts you in depth. So yeah, the Knicks still have work to do on that end, and that's on the front office. And yeah, I don't think it happens in season, but I do think that they'll figure out a way to find those guys. I mean, I trust this front office because they've earned my trust. Like maybe that makes like I know that appeal to authority isn't a great argument, but they've done enough for me, and they've made decisions that I haven't agreed with that have worked out and been really good. So I'm going to
I also think appeal to authority is different than betting on a track record, right? I do think those are two different things.
So yeah, and I just think that they've made decisions I haven't agreed with that have clearly been the correct decisions. So I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, and I'll see where they are. I guess the best way to put it is like I think I'm more interested in what this roster looks like at the start of next season than I am really considering any type of significant trade being made this season.
I guess like the qualifier would be significant, right? Because it's tougher to imagine them making a major move. I think the other pushback I would make a little bit is this offseason, they don't have a ton of flexibility. Just because one, it would be really nice if they could add a rookie, but they won't have a pick in this draft. So they really what they have to play with right now is that Washington protected pick, and which is kind of a fake pick, right? It's a good chance it doesn't convey. And then you have Mitchell Robinson. So when you say you don't think they'll make a significant trade, do you think that includes keeping Mitch? Because it does seem, it's not like they're overflowing with depth at center, but we know Cat's going to play a lot there. Sims and Precious have, if nothing else, proven themselves as serviceable. I think, particularly in Precious's case, I think he's capable of a lot more. But we've seen the rim protection numbers with Sims. When he's bad, it looks really bad. But on the whole, again, definitely serviceable. It would appear with Mitch's health concerns and just the fact that they're probably they're not going to play him heavy minutes. I haven't wanted to trade him for the sake of trading him, just because this is a guy that swung a playoff series against the team we're going to have to go up. We might have to go up against in Cleveland. I don't think the Knicks win that series against Cleveland without Mitchell Robinson. That's understanding that Hartenstein, but it was a complete domination on the glass. Do you think Mitchell Robinson's on the roster past the trade deadline? And if not,
yeah, I think he is. I 100% think he's going to be on the roster. I just don't. They're not going to get value for him. There's no point in trading him.
I mean, like a Finney-Smith or something like that.
They're not going to get Dorian Finney-Smith for him. Why would the fucking Nets want Mitchell Robinson?
I mean, he's still a pretty young player.
He didn't have value this offseason in trade. We know this. The Knicks tried trading him. They didn't get anything worthwhile.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of teams are holding out, right? I remember the Nets wanted a first for Schroeder. Obviously didn't get that. Mitch is still only 25. He's an elite rim protector still, probably the best offensive rebounder in the NBA. You just don't think there's a trade out there that's worthwhile for Mitch.
Yeah, I don't see any world where he's going to return value this season.
and you think it's better to just hold on to him than dump him at that point for like a
Yeah,
second or third.
the Knicks have limited assets. They can't just dump players because reasons. I mean, they haven't ever really operated like that in terms of this front office anyway, of just dumping players for no purpose.
I mean, the closest I think you can say is the Grimes trade, where especially now seeing him have some success looks a little bit selling low. They traded him. I mean, I know they used Bogdanovich's salary to get Bridges, but two guys that are no longer on the roster. You know, that may have been the one where they sold low a little bit. But I mean, it's also, we know Mitch is a little bit of a um, he is a character on social media. If he comes back and he's playing 10 or 15 minutes and he's really got a small role because he's playing behind Cat, you know, is there a risk that maybe there's malcontent there and they have to pull the trigger, and can you get a wing, right? Someone like a Fontecchio or something, like who's out of the rotation there. I don't know if the salaries would work, but I am curious, and I'm a little surprised. I think that because I'm pretty high on Mitch, so I wouldn't mind keeping him, but I'm a little surprised you don't think they'll make a move with him. But I guess the hope would be from your point that he comes back, proves that he's healthy, and then he has some more value in the offseason, right?
Yeah, I just don't think they're going to get a good enough piece back in return for him in trade this season. I mean, I could be wrong. Maybe I am. Maybe they're willing to not just trade him, but they're going to attach a look. They have their 2030 pick swap. There are teams that could view that as a value. And yeah, like Mitch, maybe a team was like, well, we don't know that Mitch is good anymore, or we don't trust his health, or whatever. But if we're getting this pick swap, and maybe we can afford to see what Mitch becomes and see how he recovers through the end of the season, and then maybe we can turn around and trade him again in the offseason for more draft capital or whatever. Sure, that's possible. I definitely I'm not taking it off the table. I'm not saying it's never going to happen. I just don't think that they're going to get in a value in a trade to move Mitch this season. But I do think that I don't think there's a world where Mitchell Robinson is on the opening day roster of the 2025-2026 Knicks. I think he's on borrowed time in New York. And I think if he didn't get hurt in in that playoff series, re-aggravate his injury and have this extended layoff and recovery and all this stuff, I think he would have gotten moved last offseason.
So in a way, Embiid was just doing him a favor.
I guess, yeah. I guess if Mitch's goal was to stay in New York, then Embiid did him a solid. But yeah, I think the writing's on the wall for him. I don't think they want to be on the hook for his next contract. And we also know that they have form for this, right? Where it's like if they don't really want to extend you, if they don't want to keep you on the books for the future, and I don't think they particularly like having expiring contracts, which has played out throughout many. We've seen this in many instances. Then they will find a way to move you for somebody that they prefer. And that's kind of where I just think that Mitch, he's good and the things he does and whatever, but I'm kind of over the whole Mitchell Robinson. Is he healthy? Will he be healthy? Can he stay on the floor?
There's a lot of words.
Yeah.
There's the free throw shooting. There is,
the lack of offensive skill other than offensive rebounding. Like he's a very, I mean, this has always been the case with him, right? He's great at the things he does well, and the things that he doesn't do, I wouldn't even say he's bad. He just doesn't do them. He doesn't do any of them.
Yeah, and especially now you mentioned, right, it's tough for the Knicks to play the same way when Cat sits. I can't think of a more diametrically opposed style than going from Cat to Mitchell Robinson, right? So that would, not to say that, I still think there's value in that. I like to be able to tag teams in different ways. I think I would like to have Mitch on the roster if you are facing a team like Cleveland or even Boston, put some pressure on the offensive glass. But there's also the questions about, I actually think the 5-out stuff is overblown with Mitch. I think it's probably more Tibbs' scheme that hung him out to dry a little bit against those kind of. I'm not even talking about Boston, really. Even when we played Chicago with Vooch, those kind of players give Mitch problems. Yeah, I don't know. But I do think I guess, yeah, we'll see what kind of value he has coming back. It does seem like the injury prognosis has not been encouraging. Um, I do, before we get out of here, I did want to talk about Landry Shamet a little bit. I haven't watched him a ton. In the preseason, I was encouraged. He plays bigger than he is, even though he's only 6'4". I think he's a wingspan guy. And we know he can shoot. Are you up? What are kind of your expectations? Let's say he comes back in a week or two. It's they really. I mean, Tibbs is not willing to trust Dadier. Matt Ryan seems to have fallen out of favor, and right now the starters are just playing 40 minutes. How optimistic are you about Shamet? Is he 15, 20-minute per game guy? Can he do, I guess, his best Alec Burks or more like Bogdanovich, I guess, because not an on-ball guy impression?
I mean, I don't really have strong thoughts on Shamet. I don't particularly think he's that valuable, other than he'll play minutes. And I think the Knicks they need somebody to just eat minutes and give, Josh Hart and OG Anunoby and Mikal Bridges a little more time to sit on that bench. If Shamet can play 15 minutes a night and you take 5 minutes off of OG, 5 minutes off of Mikal Bridges, 5 minutes off Josh Hart, that would be a huge win. I mean, obviously it's not going to work that cleanly, but you got to get my point is if you can cut those guys' minutes load in a way that's meaningful, I think that would be a huge help to the Knicks and kind of a huge, I mean, it would just be really important and key. So we'll see. I mean, I guess that's the best way to put it is we'll have to see what ends up happening there. But yeah, like I'm not harboring high hopes for Landry Shamet, but I do think that just the ability to play minutes and cut down minutes for other guys is significant. And if you think at times, like, I do think personally, I think the Knicks have issues at times in terms of having quick trigger 3-point shooters. Shamet's a guy with a quick trigger. There's a value to that. I think they could use a little bit more variance in terms of somebody to just come in and take a bunch of volume threes and get hot some nights and give them a little boost. Deuce can do that, but that's it. It's like Campaign isn't really that type of player, even though he shot the three ball well for the Knicks this year. Shamet's a different type of player, and I think the Knicks need that type of player. So, if nothing else, I think Shamet will give you an idea of what he like, of maybe the type of player you want and need. So yeah, I don't know. I think he's more valuable because he can just play minutes versus what he, being a super value add on the floor itself.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think it is. So the Knicks have the most heavily played starting lineup in the NBA, but their net rating is up over 6 now, right? So it's starting to, I think early in the season, the net rating wasn't good for that starting lineup, and there was some panicking there. It's been trending up. I think, you said this before, they really like their top 5, 6 guys. I think the biggest thing is, can you get them to April and actually see, like, can they beat Boston with those 5 or 6 guys going to play? And at that time, you will probably be okay with some of these minutes loads. But they got to make it there, right? And does Shamet allow you to bring Bridges down maybe to 35, 36 minutes? He's playing 38 right now. I believe he leads the league. Does it allow you to rest OG maybe once in a while? I know you're kind of a little bit more skeptical on the minutes thing. And I tend to agree with you, but particularly with OG and Cat, those are guys where if something happens to them, obviously Brunson it's his own thing, but OG and Cat are 2 guys where if something happens to them or if they're out for an extended period of time, that can sink the season. They have to be healthy. And I don't know that this is sustainable if the Knicks don't get someone that can alleviate their load a little bit. And we saw what happened last year, and I think that would be the most disappointing outcome. Another injury riddled season, just because these are the playoffs are going to be important data points, right? I think the one question maybe Cat hasn't answered yet is, he's been a playoff dropper himself. I think he acquitted himself well last playoffs, and it's within reason, right? I think he's 18-10, up like mid-50s true shooting. So it's definitely well below his regular season standards, but compared to a guy like Randall, obviously it's much more respectable. But you want that data. Can he hold up in the playoffs? How are teams going to attack him in the playoffs? How we're how are teams going to defend Brunson? Right? There's more and more tape coming out on him. Do you have answers for the different scenarios you get? When teams are putting wings on Brunson, how are the Knicks going to adapt to that? How is Deuce going to adapt to closer defense? I think I'm reasonably confident in Deuce being able to shoot in the playoffs, but more data points there. And so you hope that Shamet is a guy that can just help everyone get to April in reasonably good health. And so far, knock on wood, they haven't had major issues on this. But it does feel like you're playing a little bit with fire. It's Cat actually has 58 true shooting for his career in the playoffs. So not as, but you do want to see can he get to another level in the playoffs. Those are interesting data points, and we hope the Knicks can get them. And I think that the Randall had worked out because they were able to get Cat, but that was something we were all disappointed in, that Randall had this reputation of the playoff dropper, probably having his best season before he got hurt last year, and really a freak injury. It would have been nice to get to see, can he do it in the playoffs now next to when he's healthy with Brunson, with a guy like OG to protect him on defense. We didn't get to see that, and I just hope we get to see what this team, how their top five in a playoff series can go against Cleveland or Boston or one of those top teams.
Yeah. We'll have to see how that plays out. All right. I think that's a good place to end this. Stacy, let the people know where they can find you and plug anything you'd like to plug.
You can find me at Stacy Patton 89. Nothing to plug. I actually liked Matt Miranda's recap of the Orlando game quite a bit on the Strickland. So I know, if you watch the game, people don't always read the recaps anymore, but I actually had some good perspective. And I mean, Matt's always fun to read, so I'll plug that.
Yeah, Matt, I really enjoyed his recap of the Magic game. Really good stuff. I have nothing to plug personally, so I will plug on all the wonderful work at the Strickland. I will also plug Josh Allen's ongoing MVP campaign. You should check that out. It's a fun watch. Other than that, I got nothing. So,
did you see that stat head comparison with Lamar Jackson, though? I mean,
yeah, that's great for Lamar Jackson. Hopefully his team can win their division. I have nothing else to plug, so that is it. That is our show for today. Thank you to our sponsor, Bet Online. I hope everybody has a great week. The Knicks play. They have their a meetup, a reunion of sorts on Thursday with the Minnesota Timberwolves. So that should be fun. All right, that is our show for today. I hope everybody has a great week, and I will see you on Friday. Peace.